Mr. Flopear's Hat by Christine E. Bradley. "It's no use looking," said Mrs. Flopear. "It isn't there. I've burnt it." Mr. Flopear was so astonished he could only stare at his wife. "You've burnt it?" he said after a moment. "You've burnt my hat?" "Yes," said Mrs. Flopear, "if you can call it a hat. Such a disgrace I never did see." "But it was such a cosy hat," said Mr. Flopear. "It kept off the rain and it kept off the sun. What more could you want?" "Well, it's gone to a cinder now," said Mrs. Flopear, "and I tell you I am glad to have seen the last of it. So now you'll have to wear your other hat." "I might like my other hat better," said Mr. Flopear, "if you had allowed me to choose it myself." With this parting shot, Mr. Flopear snatched his other hat and disappeared out of the door for his morning walk. And being rather wrapped up in his own troubles, he almost passed Timothy Whiskers without seeing him. "Hello, Flopear," called Timothy. "Going out for the day, are you?" "No, why should I be?" said Mr. Flopear. "Wearing your best hat," said Timothy Whiskers. "'Tisn't my best hat," said Mr. Flopear. "Only hat I've got. Wife's just burnt my other." "There now, has she really?" said Timothy. "Still, that's a nice hat you're wearing, Flopear." "Not my style at all," said Mr. Flopear. "Don't feel happy in it, never have." Said Timothy. "I wonder how it would suit me." Timothy Whiskers was very particular about his appearance. Anything in the way of new clothes always gave him great pleasure. "Try it," said Mr. Flopear, taking off his hat and handing it over. Timothy Whiskers carefully fitted it on. "Well?" he said. "Splendid," said Mr. Flopear. "It looks as different as possible on you. I knew it wasn't my style, only the wife would insist on buying it because it was the latest model." "I'm thinking," said Timothy slowly, as he handed back the hat. "I've one or two jobs in the garden want doing. If you'd care to help me, then I'll do a good turn and take the hat off your hands." "Why, that's awfully good of you," said Mr. Flopear. "Only thing is, I won't have a hat at all then, will I?" "Well, why not go without a hat?" said Timothy. "No," said Mr. Flopear. "I never did like the wind tickling my ears." "Well, you could have a beret, you know," said Timothy. "That would be cosy." "But it would only cover one ear," said Mr. Flopear. "Still, we'll see. What were the jobs you wanted me to help you with, Timothy?" "Let's walk back to my house and I'll show you," said Timothy Whiskers. So they turned and walked back together. "You see," said Timothy, "I'm making my garden all nice and neat with new gravel paths, and I've just had a load of gravel delivered. Only as you see," said Timothy, "it all has to be wheeled in from the road to the back garden." "Dear me, there's a great deal of it, isn't there?" said Mr. Flopear. "You're quite right, Flopear, there is," said Timothy. "That's why I shall be so glad of some help. There's the wheelbarrow and there's the shovel if you'd like to go ahead. And what about the hat, Flopear?" "I'll just keep it on while I'm working," said Mr. Flopear. "Otherwise bending about in the hot sun might do me some harm when I'm not used to being without a hat." The gravel was very heavy, and all Mr. Flopear's barrow loads didn't seem to make much difference to the big heap in the road. Mr. Flopear grew hotter and hotter, and his arms and legs ached. "How dark it is getting," said Mr. Flopear, and almost at once big spots of rain began to fall. "I expect it will only be a shower," said Mr. Flopear, "so I'd better slip my coat on again and keep on working. If the gravel gets very wet, it will be heavier than ever." The shower kept on for some time, and Mr. Flopear worked away all through it because he wanted to get the job over. It was only when the clouds were blowing away that Timothy Whiskers came to see how he was getting on. "Why, Flopear, there was no need to get wet," he said. "And good gracious, man, whatever have you done to your hat?" "Hat?" said Mr. Flopear. "Why, I'd quite forgotten my hat." He pulled off his hat, and as he held it up and looked at it, a smile of delight spread over his face. All its style had gone. It just drooped. "Why," said Mr. Flopear, "it's grown quite different in the rain. It feels as if it belongs to me now, and I'm afraid I really can't bear to part with it, Timothy." "You don't have to," said Timothy Whiskers, looking at the hat in disgust. "I wouldn't be seen in such a thing." "And I'm sorry I haven't finished my job," said Mr. Flopear, "but you won't mind if I don't stay to do any more, will you, Timothy? I really must hurry home. My wife will be so pleased to know that I've taken a liking to my hat at last."